Get started. So welcome to this admission session on the School of Natural Science, known as NS around here. I'm Elizabeth Conlisk, the Dean of NS, and I'm here with a few faculty and staff to tell you a little bit about what it's like to study science at Hampshire. We think of NS as kind of a hidden gem at Hampshire. We have a lot of famous alums who go into the arts and film, and they sometimes become the face of the college. But you know, and less is known about the extraordinary successes of our science students. So we're glad to have the chance to tell you about what it's like to study science in Hampshire and how it is different than at other colleges. So we have a kind of an agenda for the session, and first I'll have everybody introduce themselves, and then I'll say a few general words about the program and studying science in Hampshire. And then each of us, the four of us from the school, are going to talk about the work of our students, because that's probably the best way to understand what it's like to be at Hampshire. And then we'll open the session up for Q&A, any questions you have. So let's see. So how about Sarah? Maybe you introduce yourself first.
Sure. Hey, I am Sarah Steely. I use she, her pronouns. I am the lab technician for School of Natural Science. I'm also an alum, and I did my Div 3 in chemistry and environmental science. And I've been working here for 9 years. And I work a lot with students in the laboratory, especially with instrumental analysis or chemistry or water quality analysis, or a variety of different lab-based projects that they might have.
Okay, maybe John.
Hi, I'm John Castrino, Assistant Professor of Molecular Biology. My main interests are in cancer and the molecular basis of cancer, but I teach classes in a lot of areas like biochemistry, cell biology, molecular biology, cancer, and some other things. And I'll talk more in a little bit about my other interests. Naya, do you want to go?
So yeah, I'm Naya Gabriel. I use they, them pronouns. I am the lab manager and the greenhouse supervisor. So I'm sort of the other half of the lab duo, me and Sarah. And I have been at Hampshire for over 15 years. And I was trained as a chemist, and my interests are kind of varied. Science, they range from science fiction to the arts. I'm also a professional artist. Those are my paintings up there. So yeah.
Great, thanks.
Yeah.
And I should add that I teach, I'm a professor of public health at Hampshire, and I teach epidemiology and courses in global health and food studies. So if any of you have questions about studying health-related fields, I'm happy to talk to you later. But let me say a few words about what makes NS distinctive. I assume you know something about Hampshire, for instance, that you build your own major in negotiation with your advisors, that we give narrative evaluations instead of grades, and that you spend your senior year doing a major project that you design. So I won't talk much about those things, but we're happy to entertain questions along those lines as well. So I'll mostly focus on studying science at Hampshire and how it's different than science is taught at other places. And one of the first things to say is that our classes are small. The average size is about 17, and we almost never have classes over 25. There are no big lecture halls of Biology 101. In fact, we don't even have large classrooms on the campus, so we couldn't have those if we wanted. But the upshot of that is that you get to know the faculty well, they get to know you well. There's a lot more discussion. It's more seminar based than it is. We just don't lecture really. And another distinction is that you work closely with your advisor all 4 years. So over time, they get to know your goals and your skills and your side interests and help you figure out what classes will be good to take and how to make good use of your summers. By the time you're in Div 3, the senior project, you're meeting weekly or bi-weekly with your Div 3 advisors. You get to know each other really well. And I'm still in touch with students that I had 20 years ago. When somebody just came to my house for dinner when they were passing through town. It's like, I would say, probably all of us would say that's the best part of our job, is that there's a real the closeness between the faculty, staff, and students. And I would say, as I said, this goes for staff too. Naya and Sarah and the other staff in NS are there supporting you in your labs and buying things for your projects, and they become additional mentors along with your advisors. So that's, I think, unusual for a science department, that you get to know the staff so well. Another distinctive feature about studying science at Hampshire is that we use the primary literature, the original research from year one. We don't just teach from big textbooks where you're expected to memorize a bunch of facts. I mean, we do rely on those as resources, but from the very first year, students are reading the original research, and we spend a lot of time talking about the process of science, how we collect data and then draw inferences from that. And this really sets students up to think critically about science and to know how to find and use information about science topics going forward. It allows you to be good citizens, informed citizens, because so much of what we need to have opinions about has to do with scientific information. But it also really sets you up well for graduate school and medical school. Our students do really well in getting into those programs, and then doing well once they're in them. They sometimes find that writing a master thesis is just like doing another Div 3. They really hit the ground running. Another distinctive feature is that students do hands-on research. Again, from year one, you're working in the lab or in the field, or you're conducting a survey. You're actively engaged in the process of doing science. And so we think this is way more interesting. It's more fun doing things, right, than just reading about people doing things. But it just makes you a better science student, because you understand what went into the science that you end up reading. Naya and Sarah will talk a little bit more about our labs and the unusual access our undergraduates have, again, even from the first year, to equipment and instruments like the NMR, but I'll leave that for later. Just a few more points and then I'll stop talking. The Div 2 is kind of like our major. It's what you do in your second and third year at Hampshire. And what really sets us apart is the flexibility you have. You're working with your advisor, and you negotiate a contract about what you're going to study. And the advisor might be saying, if you want to do this kind of a Div 3, you really should take chemistry, you really should take calculus. But it's not that there's any kind of list of courses that you have to take in order to have a certain major. And this allows students who have really diverse interests to engage in all of them. So, we often have students in the sciences who are also interested in the arts, or they're interested in political science. And you don't have to choose at Hampshire. You can do both, and ideally bring them together and see how they overlap and connect and inform one another. And in Div 2, we encourage students to be working in our labs or in other labs, or spending their summers doing getting internships that they can actually use for course credit for their Div 2. I've had students who have, and I think John has too, who've worked at other labs the entire semester, and that's counted as a semester of credit. So there's flexibility in what you're allowed to do, and then that, of course, gives you more agency over what you study. And we think then it's a more productive way to learn when you have so much say in what you're learning. Three more things. Div 3, you probably heard a lot about Div 3. It's one of our, it's the fourth year of study when students engage in an independent project, again, in negotiation with a committee, 2 people, 2 faculty members. And students sometimes, like, they know they want to do science, and they're in the lab and doing a kind of more classically science-based project. But students also, might make a film that has to do with a science topic, or might travel internationally and collect data, and that they're just allowed to pursue their own interests, and there's sort of no, there are almost no bounds on this. I mean, it has to be a substantive academic project, but students find, it amazes me the range of topics that students do, even in the sciences. We have a network of alums that are really dedicated to Hampshire. They identify strongly with Hampshire long after they leave, and are always looking for ways to stay connected and help students. So we are very regularly hearing from them and saying, oh, there's an internship at where I work, or I went to this graduate school. If you know anybody who's interested in this topic, this graduate program, please have them talk to me. And that really helps students, I think, when they make that transition from Hampshire to what they do next. And the last thing I want to say, it's a sort of a around here, is that we're a pump, not a filter. And that we're not looking to weed out students from the science program and make the first year science classes so hard, and then if you don't cut it, then you're bumped out, like some pre-med programs are. We more see ourselves as welcoming everybody, no matter where they are in their with their background. I mean, some students did not particularly strong science or math programs in their high schools, and think they don't like it. But when they take a course and it's around a topic that interests them, and they have control over what it is that they study, they realize, oh, I not only like this, I'm good at it. And at graduation, when we meet the families of our graduates, I so often hear parents saying, like, I never thought my child was going to major in science, or do a science Div 3 because in high school they hated science or something. But it's our goal to sort of make it work for you and make it fun, and not to say, okay, this is what you have to do in order to succeed in our program, and if you don't, you're out, which is a really different approach to studying science than at some other places. So that was a brief overview of I think some of our distinctive features, but there's so much more to say. And I think now what I'm going to do is hand the program off to Sarah, who's going to talk a little bit about some work that she's had, she's seen in our students or in our classes.
All right, so let me know if there's feedback. I'm in the chemistry lab right now, and the fridges and freezers just kicked on, so there's a lot of background noise. So you can actually kind of see, this is the chemistry side of our lab. So I have worked here for almost 9 years, and I did my undergrad here. I've definitely worked with students on a whole variety of projects. I mostly support students in lab sciences, but if you're out in the field doing like water quality measurements, or you want to see how much nitrate or dissolved oxygen there is in a stream, I'm often the person that you would interact with to get the equipment to do those measurements. And I work a lot with classes as well. So one really awesome thing that I experienced as a student here, and then when I was in graduate school tried to actually work when I was teaching labs, was the way we do lab-based science here is pretty cool. There's a lot of project-based work. You get to use instrumentation or design projects in a way that you wouldn't normally get to at a lot of other places. We have a bunch of equipment that's pretty standard use, especially for chemistry, but to have to be able to actually hands-on use that equipment is definitely a benefit. So just some examples of projects I've worked on with students. We had a student graduating this year. Her name's Maggie, and she worked on looking at silver nanoparticles in wastewater, and also looking at characterizing the actual particle size of those nanoparticles. We have a piece of equipment called an inductively coupled plasma mass spectrometer that you can use to actually look at nanoparticles and stuff like that. I've also worked with students who do a lot of various different things, like looking at elements in feathers or in tree cores or in corn. I've worked with hops chemistry and zymergy classes, so beer brewing, looking at, analyzing what kind of elements are in the beer, or looking at isoalpha acids that are one of the things in hops, using HPLC. We also have had courses. We have a professor who often teaches a short course in California. And one summer, last summer or the summer before, worked with students from that throughout the summer, analyzing water quality. They were looking at magnesium, calcium, and the role of microorganisms in making carbonate minerals in alkali lakes in California. With our organic chemistry class, students are often, with that series, students often design projects. Sometimes it's like, hey, I like this plant, or I want to extract curcumin from turmeric, or, this herb is beneficial. Like, what can we pull out the, anthocyanins from cabbage or something? And so we work hands-on with those kind of things. Let me think. We also have a bunch of, as far as chemistry goes, we've had students also who have done things like looking at green chemistry, so ways to make chemical reactions more environmentally friendly or cheaper, or reusing carbon dioxide in ways that aren't, so that the net reaction doesn't put off carbon dioxide. Yeah, so those are some examples of people that I've worked with, or students' projects that I've worked with, things that you can do. Yeah. Feel free to hit me with questions in the chat later.
Okay, John, maybe you want to.
Yeah, so as Elizabeth was talking about a lot of differences between Hampshire and other places, one of the things that I love about Hampshire since I've been there is, if you go to a normal college and you want to do a laboratory research project and get involved in research somehow, you have to go to a professor and sort of beg and say, can I work in your lab and do all this kind of stuff? And then, if they eventually say yes, then, you have to work on their projects. But what I do is, I love cancer research. I think it's a really important field, but molecular biology is a really flexible field. It's a great set of resources that people can use in a lot of different disciplines. And so I like to really help students use molecular biology to help pursue whatever their interests are. So a few examples, I had a student that was really interested in neuroscience. And he wanted to do an independent study on making human robot hybrids. And I was like, there's no way that we could do that kind of thing at Hampshire. And he wound up creating this really cool system where we wound up being able to genetically modify stem cells and make them responsive to light. And we could turn those stem cells into neurons. So he kind of sort of did what we had anticipated. And so, he wound up going on to get a PhD at Harvard. I had another student that was interested in using bacteria to generate electricity. And so he learned a little bit of microbiology at Hampshire. We got a little bit of a system going here. But then he found a really big lab at UMass that was working on that kind of field. So he used his experience. He jumped right into their lab. He learned a lot in that experience. And he graduated and wound up going to Cornell. I had a totally different field. I had a student interested in more ecological sciences. And so she wound up doing cricket genetics in this hybrid zone in the New England area. And she did an experiment where she worked on the different species of crickets and their mating preferences across species and that kind of thing. She wound up getting a PhD at University of Virginia. Had another student that was also really interested in neuroscience. We have a lot of neuroscience students around here. And he was all sure he was going to be a neuroscientist when he grew up. And then he wound up doing an internship at Rice and falling in love with cancer biology. And his lab really liked the way he worked, so they sent him back to Hampshire with a whole bunch of resources. And then he wound up doing a Div 3 on cancer biology. And he's a med student now at Emory College or Emory University. And then, you know, we do also have some students interested in brewing and that kind of thing, brewing microbiology. So we used some molecular biology techniques to modify the brewing yeast so that they would digest gluten. We haven't been totally successful in that project, but we keep making a little bit of progress so that, you know, people that have celiacs or gluten intolerant can drink beer and theoretically bread and eat bread if we make the yeast strong enough. But that student wound up being the head brewer at the head microbiologist at one of the Massachusetts big breweries. So it just shows you, you know, I love my molecular biology, but it's really a tool to help you develop your interests. And I think most faculty at Hampshire were really here to help figure out what your interests are and give you the best experience possible in your particular field. And Sarah moved over into the biology side of our laboratory. And we have, you know, a lot of equipment here, like a quantitative PCR machine, regular PCR machines, centrifuges and other kinds of stuff. What else is over there? Gel imaging systems. We're turning now slowly towards what we call the cave. That's our cell analysis and visualization environment. It's basically our tissue culture room. We have some cool microscopes in there and some fancy equipment. We grow a lot of different types of mammalian cells in there. But yeah, so one of the things that's also, and Elizabeth kind of touched on this, Sarah, if you turn left and point towards the hallway, like outside the cave. So the hallway over there is sort of contiguous with our laboratories. And there's no other place in the country where students have that much access to laboratories. So as soon as you learn how to use something, that's your resource. And so, you know, we try to get students into labs as much as possible. It's a great sort of collaborative environment. The admissions people will probably tell you there's no walls between the sciences, but at Hampshire, there's also no walls to get into the sciences. So that's one of our huge advantages. So I'm happy to take any kinds of questions that you have. And otherwise, don't show my door. Students like to decorate my door. It's kind of crazy. But yeah, I'll pass it off to Naya.
All right, sorry, I had to look away. I can't really do the roving. All right, so yes, and so I kind of connect with students in all different sort of fields, and I kind of just want to tell you a bunch of different examples. And so one of my roles is associated with the bioshelter or the greenhouse, which is attached to the Kern Center. And that space is a research space. It's also used for classes. And we grow plants in there. And you'll have to forgive, there's probably going to be some background noise. My mom's making a blender drink. So anyway, and so that space is very multi-purpose. We've had, you know, there was a student that just graduated who was a transfer student. In fact, I'm looking at you, Blythe. You don't know I'm looking at you, but I am. Who just graduated, Liam, and he designed his own hydroponic system. It's a vertical hydroponic vegetable production system. So he basically was connecting entrepreneurship with sustainable agriculture, social justice issues, addressing food access. He lives in Holyoke here in Massachusetts. He just developed the system. You know, this soilless. I mean, obviously there are other soilless hydroponic systems, but this was specifically based on the materials that he had access to. So we had you know, materials that were left over from other Div 3 projects. And so we were, you know, he used those, and he sourced materials from, you know, folks that he had connections with. He went online, and, you know, so he had a mission, and he, you know, he went after it. And he, you know, he worked with a bunch of different faculty members and a bunch of different staff members. And he ended up growing romaine lettuce and other greens. It was like this wall of lettuce and greens, and it wasn't just a proof of concept. He actually had enough that he then delivered all these greens to various organizations in the town, in Holyoke and surrounding areas. And so that's just one example. We've also had folks doing mycology, so working with mushrooms and doing one student, Montana, did so she started out, she worked on a mushroom farm. She then took a mushroom cultivation course at UMass. I mean, obviously she did a bunch of different things. Then she developed an independent study with a faculty member on microremediation, and created a research project that focused on microremediation of cigarette butts. So basically looking at how mushrooms could be used to remediate the toxic effects of cigarette butts, you know, in the soil. I believe one of the examples was that they're really toxic to snails, but I'm sure there's obviously other ways in which the mini compounds found in cigarettes are toxic. And so that's another example. And she also organized her own symposium on mycology, myco-sustainability, I think was the name. It was Myco-Sustainability Symposium. So that's an example of where students have so much, at Hampshire, have a lot of freedom to sort of not just design your own project, but then to take that to the next level and do something as big as like design a symposium, right? And bring in speakers and have this platform to educate and work with the community. And so that's what they do. And obviously there's a lot of different intersections between the sciences and social justice and various different things. We also, so John, let's see, you mentioned, you know, cricket, you know, a student that did cricket genetics. We've had students that working, it might even been the same one, but you know, that had crickets in the bioshelter and other various, it's called the bioshelter because it's, you know, sometimes we've had just plants and sometimes we've had fish in there. Sometimes we've had other various things on purpose. We'll get to questions in a second. There's a question in the chat. Both Sarah and John mentioned students that worked with various things that also connect to another space. So there were, you know, herbs and plants that had various different chemical compounds. Those herbs and some of those plants might have been grown in the bioshelter. The hops, I don't know if, I'm trying to remember if anyone actually grew hops in the community garden. I don't remember, but there's definitely some crossovers there. And certainly the brewing science, we have, you know, we have a food science space. So there's a lot of crossover there. So we also have, let's see, I can just sort of mention a couple of things. We have, Elizabeth mentioned our pre-health program. We have, or our pre-health sort of students in general. One student that I worked with a bit, because of her interest in alternative medicine and permaculture, she brought the first permaculture design course to campus. She didn't run it, but she arranged for it to be taught at Hampshire. But she just graduated from the med school at University of Vermont. So she is now Dr. Nora Stedman, and that's really exciting. I was very proud of her, as we all are. And so, and then there's the farming / sustainable agriculture. We have a lot of farmers and other forms that takes. One example that comes to mind, a student that I worked with to some varying degree, was Malika Spencer. I mean, we have lots of examples, but this is just one example. I didn't want to pull from just most recent, but she took classes in soil science, plant biology, and looked at just, what she thought of as an unsustainable food system. Obviously, I agree, and started her own, small scale sustainable agriculture farm in the Poconos, and then went back home to Pennsylvania, in Bucks County, and started another farm called Roots to River in 2013, and is still there. So that's a pretty exciting example. We have local, just down the road farms started by alums. And so it's amazing how people sort of go out into the world, they say local, or they go elsewhere and start these projects. And her Div 3 was very much like Liam's Div 3, which was sort of the kernel of that project, of starting her own farm. And then, we have a physics studio. We have it's a lab for physics, and that was just renovated. It's gorgeous. And we also we've had courses that can, I have my own personal interest in the intersection of science and art. And we had a course called Physics of Color that was specifically designed to look at, it was designed to look at color, obviously, from the perspective of physics, taught by a physicist, and it was meant to be broadly accessible both to science-focused students as well as those in the arts. And we had handheld spectroscopes, and she definitely did not shy away from introducing or having folks work with math in the class, and it worked out. I actually took the class with them the first time, and it was great. It was beautiful. It was a lot of fun. How we wove the different sort of angles of science and art together. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different angles to it, a lot of different ways that people engage with our spaces. So obviously I don't want to talk too long, but if folks have questions.
Yeah, so thanks everybody. And I had my own examples, but in the interest of time, I think I'm going to skip this, but I'm going to say one thing, that if it seems intimidating to know that you would do a project like that, please know that we set you up for it. We give you skills all the way through your first 3 years in Hampshire, and are creating opportunities for you to be doing things. And then that sets you up to get summer internships. And so you, it's not like you have to, you come up with these ideas all on your own. And even though it can be kind of intimidating to think about doing a project like that when you start, I've yet to have a student who just didn't know what to do for Div 3. Everybody does one, and they with the help of their advisors and lots of conversations with their friends, they come up with something. And and then they get the support, and we have a lot of grant money to provide supplies and training and travel costs, and all through your 4 years in Hampshire. So that really helps students when all of a sudden it's on them to come up with this project. But I know we have one question at least, and I'm wondering, I don't know if John, if you have any thoughts about, the question from Raj is, has any alum worked on a project in the field of quantum biology? You're on mute, John.
Sorry, I'm still not used to that. Yeah, so the professor that did the physics of color class, we had a student that was interested in the intersections of physics and biology, and she wound up designing an independent study one semester where both of us were sort of her advisors for that independent study. And so she sort of reviewed the field of quantum biology. She was mostly focusing on one particular topic. Oh, I'm blanking on the name, but there's this resonance that's proposed to happen in the microtubules of neurons that's supposed to be the source of all of our consciousness. But because she reviewed the literature so thoroughly and from a lot of different angles, she actually disproved that thing could actually happen. And so she kind of lost interest in the relationship between quantum physics and biology. We are thinking about doing a combined physics biology class in the future. It probably wouldn't be at the quantum level, but it's probably something that we would address within the course at some point. So we haven't actually, I don't know of any Div 3s that specifically focused on quantum biology, but it's a topic that we've touched on as a faculty.
Are there any other questions? You can put it in the chat, or you can just feel free to ask them as well. Awesome. Well, awesome. I'm gonna write our information. If you can put your email in the chat.
I'll just step in while.
Yeah, go ahead, Elizabeth.
I was going to say, I'll step in and while students might be thinking of questions and add a few of the examples that I was going to give of work, because as a public health person and epidemiologist, my students tend to work less in the lab. My students have worked internationally. If you have any interest in global health, I'm happy to talk about those opportunities. Like even in Div 2, so it's not just in Div 3s. This relationship with alum who has a project in El Salvador and other parts around cancer, interested in early in Div to learn about the project. We're thinking that maybe they do that for Div 3. And so with grant money, we were able to fund their travel to Mexico, where a project was going on sometime in a language school studying Spanish. And then they did data analysis with the team from in Mexico that later led to a publication. And so they like not only got language skills and experience working in a, but they also really developed their data analysis skills and were part of writing that paper up. And then I had a student who came interested in film, and she took my epidemiology class, and she then became interested in public health, and she had lived in Nepal. She returned to Nepal, well, to India, and was working with Tibetan refugees and their concepts of health and their towards health. So it was very qualitative. Not, it was, you know, a departure from what I do and what we tend to do in sciences, but it was, she ended up, she's in a PhD program now in epidemiology at Emory. So, you know, not the Div 3 sometimes, like, it's a pursuit of an interest of students. It's not necessarily a direct path to what they're going to be doing their graduate work. Navi, another student, for her, I guess it was after her third, an internship, a summer fellowship to work in on an archaeological dig. So it's very different. And she ended up working at a lab at Yale doing the analysis for her Div 3 and is now in medical school. So it was a little bit of a departure. Just finishing her first year of medical school. And she said that one thing that really strikes her is how Hampshire cultivated her love of learning, and she hasn't lost that. And she said that they're really bonded with in at school, who at medical school, who are who enjoy this, just their class because of what they're learning. And she said, but there are an awful lot who just sort of had that beaten out of them. And that was a real, it really made my day to hear that allowing students to pursue their interests maintains and cultivates that love of we all hope to have. So any questions come up while I was chatting?
And I don't know that we've necessarily mentioned this, but in terms of health, we've also had folks go into like become naturopaths or doulas. Like it's not just med school. I don't obviously I just can't remember whether we've mentioned that or not. No, so I'll point that out.
Yeah, having the 5 colleges for coursework and for support is really, our students use that a lot. There's a bus system that connects all 5 of the colleges. And I don't know if I've had any students have like never taken a course in the 5 colleges. They almost always at some point are, and some students are using the 5 colleges a lot. What made me think of that one was Naya was bringing up alternative medicine. We do offer courses, but UMass does too, quite a bit, and so does Smith. And so it's not like you're limited to what we offer at Hampshire. You have faculty of 5 different institutions available to you.
I guess I have a question just in terms of, it's a question that I've also heard other students ask in terms of internship opportunities within the lab or like in nearby labs. What does that look like for students?
So I can speak to a little bit of that. Like we have opportunities for summer students. Like when I was a student, I did a summer research project here on campus. And then the next summer, I did a research experience for undergraduates at a different place, which then informed an independent study that I did that following fall. So there are plenty of different opportunities. And
yeah, we have a lot of already pre-established sort of connections and relationships, but we also have, you know, it depends on how do I put this, how confident I suppose you are, because there are some students who will go out and sort of make their own relationships, and that has certainly happened as well. But like I said, as Sarah pointed out, we do have already, you know, connections, so that can happen for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I've had I think 10 summer students over the last 4 years or something like that. So there tend to be some students on campus, obviously not this year, but one of the great things about Hampshire students is you sort of learn this fearlessness. It can be kind of intimidating to start contacting heads of labs, but if you're already used to just talking to your professors every day like they're normal humans, then contacting anyone is not a very intimidating thing. And so some of my students' best work has just been they read a paper and they were just like totally blown away by the topic that they said, I want to go work in that person's lab.
Yeah.
And they contacted them and the person was like, yeah, sure, come on over. And so, that kind of thing is really useful. And I think Hampshire helps students sort of get over that speed bump of wanting to reach out to people. And also, I can also mention there are some student grants. A lot of labs will say, yeah, you can come and work in my lab, but we can't pay you. Hampshire does have some resources to help pay students over the summer for internships on and off campus.
And we've had students do things like semester at sea through Woods Hole or other different things for academic credit. So we have our Career Options Resource Center can hook you up with information about those kind of opportunities. Same with our study abroad programs. And one other thing, can't remember if we said, but like a lot of the research that we all do ends up turning into publications. So like the summer I researched here on Hampshire campus ended up turning into 2 different peer-reviewed publications. And I came out of my undergrad experience with 3 publications in peer-reviewed journals. So that's another thing that if you're interested in doing those kind of things, a lot of the projects you'll work on can turn into primary published literature. And conference presentations and all sorts of stuff that, yeah.
I'm sorry, everyone. I have to go.
No, you're fine. We are wrapping up. Bye. Thank you for coming, Naya.
Thank you. All right. Take care, everyone.
Love you too. So yeah, that's the end of it, unless anyone else has any other questions. We also put all of our information on the chat box if you want to reach out to anyone here individually. I put my email in the beginning for admissions related questions. We are here for you really to answer any and every questions that we can. So please feel free to reach out. I can also connect you with some students, some current students, if you would like to talk to them more in regards to certain programs and things in that nature. So do not hesitate to reach out. But thank you all for coming and for taking the time to be here.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.